Seth reveals the bridge between worlds. Every soul must cross alone. There is a bridge. You've never seen it. You've never been warned about it in school, in church, or in any conversation that mattered. But every soul who has ever lived has crossed it, and you will too. Not metaphorically, not eventually. You're crossing it right now in slow motion, without realizing the ground beneath your certainty is already shifting. Here's what shocked me when I first encountered Seth's teachings through Jane Roberts. What we call solid reality is actually a series of transitions. Birth to death, yes, but also waking to sleeping. One identity to another, one belief system to its dissolution. And between each of these states exists something Seth called the between, a liminal threshold that every consciousness must navigate completely alone. Not alone because you're abandoned, alone because you are the bridge. Picture this, a suspension bridge made of mist that only appears when you step onto it. Behind you, it vanishes, so retreat is impossible. Ahead, it stretches into fog so thick you can't see the other shore. No railings, no fellow travelers whose footsteps you can follow. Just you and the next step, which materializes only when you commit your weight to the emptiness. This isn't a religious parable about the afterlife. It's not a New Age fantasy about ascension. Seth described this with surgical precision as the structural reality of consciousness itself. Every major transition, and you're always in one, whether you realize it or not, requires you to cross a space where the rules of your previous reality dissolve before the rules of your next reality solidify. The world you think is stable ground, it's actually just one plank on an infinite bridge. You've been walking it your whole life. In Seth's framework, documented across books like Seth Speaks and The Nature of Personal Reality, consciousness doesn't move through static locations. It moves through states, through dimensional frequencies, through layers of reality that interpenetrate but don't collide. And the bridge between these states is where most souls panic, because it's the one place you cannot hide behind companionship, belief systems, or the comforting lie that someone else can do this for you. Here's the terrifying promise. Understanding this bridge doesn't make the crossing easier, but it does make it conscious, and crossing consciously changes everything about what waits on the other side. What Seth revealed is this: the bridge isn't reserved for death, though death is one crossing. You encounter it between waking and sleeping every single night. Between the person you were yesterday and the person you're becoming today. Between the identity that's collapsing and the one that hasn't yet formed. The bridge is always there, always demanding that you walk it alone, because no one else can choose which reality you're entering next. They can stand on the shore and wave. They can call out encouragement. But the moment your foot touches that mist, you're operating in a dimension only you inhabit. So let me ask you something. How many times have you felt the ground shift beneath you? How many moments have you experienced where you knew with absolute certainty that you were no longer the person you'd been, but you couldn't yet articulate who you were becoming? Those moments weren't breakdowns, they were crossings. You were on the bridge whether you named it or not. This video is about making those crossings conscious, about understanding the architecture of transition so that when you reach the next threshold, and you will, tonight when you sleep, someday when you die, perhaps tomorrow when an identity you've clutched finally releases, you'll recognize it for what it is: initiation, not annihilation. The bridge holds. It always has. But you must learn to trust your own weight, not someone else's testimony. Here's where it gets shocking. Seth spoke of a dimension he didn't call Avon, hell, or even the astral plane. He called it the between, not a place you travel to, but a state you enter during any significant transition. Birth, death, deep meditation, identity crisis, even the threshold of sleep. The between is where the rules of your previous reality dissolve before the rules of your next reality solidify, leaving you suspended in pure potentiality. Imagine standing in a train station at midnight. No trains are running. The departure board is blank. You're stranded between where you came from and where you're going, surrounded by echoes of both worlds, but belonging to neither. The waiting room has no benches, the exits are locked, and you realize this station exists because you're in transition. It's not on any map, it only appears during the crossing. That's the between. According to Seth's teachings, this isn't breakdown, it's revelation. The between is where consciousness sees itself naked, where the camouflage of physical form, social persona, job title, relationship status, all the structures you relied on to know who you are, shimmer like holograms about to shut off. And here's what happens in that space. Time becomes non-linear. Past and future bleed together. You might experience memories that haven't happened yet, or futures that already occurred. Seth explained this as Framework 2 bleeding through, the larger dimension where all probabilities exist simultaneously, where your entity, your multidimensional self, orchestrates your incarnations like a playwright managing multiple characters. In the between, you're no longer certain which version of yourself you are. Are you the child who was hurt, the adult who's healing, the future self who's already crossed this bridge? Yes, all of them, simultaneously. Your identity becomes fluid. The sense of having a body, that constant, reliable feeling of occupying space, starts to flicker. You might feel yourself expanding beyond your skin or contracting into a point of pure awareness. Seth called this the removal of camouflage, and it terrifies most souls because we've spent our entire lives defining ourselves by these structures. But here's the deeper teaching. The between is where Framework 2's organizing principles become visible. In ordinary waking life, you experience reality as if it's happening to you. Events arrive, circumstances change, you react. But in the between, the veil drops and you see, you are creating this. Your beliefs, expectations, fears, and desires are not passive responses to reality. They are the architects of it. This is why the between terrifies, not because it's dangerous, but because it's honest. You cannot hide from what you truly believe, truly fear, or truly desire. The between doesn't have walls to project your shadow onto. It is pure mirror, reflecting back your creative power without the buffer of physical distraction. Seth insisted, the between is the bridge because it forces you to see you are not traveling to another world. You are choosing which world to enter next. Think about the last time you felt completely unmoored, a breakup that shattered your sense of partnership, a job loss that dissolved your professional identity, a spiritual awakening that revealed your religion was costume, not truth. In those moments, you were in the between, not broken, between. The old story had ended, but the new story hadn't yet solidified. Most people panic and grab the first narrative that offers stability. They rush into new relationships, new careers, new belief systems, anything to escape the vertigo of formlessness. But Seth taught something radical. Stay in the between longer than feels comfortable, because that's where transformation actually happens. The between is not a bug in the system of consciousness. It's the feature. It's the space where you remember you're the author, not the character, where you realize the train station exists because you need time to choose which train to board next, and every train leads to a different version of your life. Here's the application. The next time you feel caught between worlds, name it. Say out loud or write in your journal, I am in the between. This simple recognition shifts you from victim to conscious crosser. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what reality am I choosing to create next? The between is alone because no one else can see the train schedule that's appearing in your mind. They're in their own station, looking at their own departures, but knowing you're in the between rather than drowning in confusion changes everything. Seth promised, those who learn to navigate the between consciously discover it's not a void to escape. It's a studio where reality is sculpted. What Seth revealed next floored me. Certain transitions must be made alone, not as punishment, not because the universe is cruel, but as structural necessity. No guide, guru, angel, or loved one can cross the bridge for you because you are the bridge. This is the teaching most spiritual seekers resist. We want companionship in our transformations. We want someone to hold our hand through death, through ego dissolution, through the collapse of everything we thought was true. And support is beautiful. I'm not saying you shouldn't have it. But Seth made a critical distinction. Support can line the shores, but the crossing itself happens in a dimension only you can enter. Here's why. The between is a dimension of pure subjective experience. It exists only in relation to your consciousness, shaped by your beliefs and expectations. Another soul could stand beside you and experience an entirely different landscape because they're crossing their bridge, not yours. Picture a mirror maze at a carnival. Each person sees different reflections based on their unique angle. The person next to you might see themselves as a child, while you see yourself as an elder. You're in the same room, but the experience is utterly individual. No guide can tell you which reflection is real, because only you can determine that. Seth broke down 3 critical crossings where solitude is non-negotiable. At death, the newly deceased must face their life review alone, not because the dead are cruel, but because only you can interpret the meaning of your experiences. Seth explained that after physical death, you enter a period of reflection where you review your life not as judgment, but as education. You see the ripples of your choices. You feel the emotional impact you had on others. But no external authority grades you. There's no cosmic report card. You alone decide what your life meant, what you learned, what you want to carry forward. This solitude isn't loneliness, it's sovereignty. During ego death, mystical experiences, psychedelic journeys, dark nights of the soul, profound meditation, the dissolution must be endured in radical isolation. Why? Because identity cannot be given to you. It can only be chosen by you. When the ego structure collapses, when everything you thought you were liquefies into undifferentiated awareness, no one can rebuild you. They can sit vigil. They can remind you that you exist. But the reconstitution of self happens in a space where no external voice can reach. Seth called this creative disintegration. It feels like death because it is death. Death of the rigid structures that kept you small. And births, even rebirths, happen alone. In profound life transitions, leaving relationships, careers, belief systems, entire identities, the crossing happens internally where no external voice can reach. You can receive advice, therapy, guidance. But the moment you decide to walk away from who you've been, you enter a territory only you can map. I'll give you an example. Say you've been a devout Christian your entire life, and suddenly, after years of questions you've suppressed, the whole framework collapses. You're no longer certain God exists, the way you were taught. This isn't an intellectual debate, it's an identity crisis. Everything you built your life on is now quicksand. Your pastor can't cross this bridge for you. Your atheist friend can't cross it for you. Your therapist can support you, but they can't decide what you believe. This crossing is yours. You must walk through the disintegration of your old cosmology and construct a new one alone, in the silence of your own consciousness. Seth warned against spiritual dependency for this reason. Teachers can point to the bridge. They can describe the terrain. But the moment you step onto it, You're operating in a dimension they cannot enter. Here's the liberation and the terror, identical. You alone decide what the bridge means, where it leads, and whether you trust it to hold your weight. This isn't about being antisocial or rejecting community. It's about recognizing that certain experiences are non-transferable. No one can digest your food for you. No one can dream your dreams for you. And no one can cross the thresholds of your consciousness for you. Seth's teaching here is radical empowerment disguised as solitude, because if no one can cross for you, then no one can stop you from crossing. No authority, no tradition, no loved one's fear can hold you on a shore you've outgrown. The practical application: the next time you're facing a major transition, a relationship ending, a career shift, a spiritual crisis, stop waiting for someone to give you permission or clarity. Recognize that this crossing is yours. Journal this question: what would I choose if I trusted that I alone am sufficient to navigate this threshold? The answer that arises is the first plank on your bridge. Let me take you through what actually happens when the body fails. Seth provided one of the most detailed maps of the death transition ever articulated. Not religious mythology, not scientific materialism, experiential cartography from a consciousness who claimed to remember dying and being born repeatedly. This is going to be specific. The release. Consciousness begins separating from the body, often before the final breath. Many near-death experiencers report watching their own resuscitation from a vantage point near the ceiling because they'd already begun crossing. Seth explained that this release is gradual for most, sudden for some. The silver cord, a metaphorical tether between consciousness and body, starts to thin. You might feel yourself floating. A sense of profound relief often accompanies this, especially if the body was in pain. The weight of physical form which you've carried your entire life without realizing how heavy it was suddenly lifts. The between state. Immediately post-death, you enter a transition zone that Seth described as highly malleable, shaped by your expectations, beliefs, and emotional state. This is where the crossing becomes intensely personal. If you believe in a tunnel of light, you'll likely experience one. If you expect deceased relatives to greet you, they will, either as actual souls or as thought forms created by your own consciousness to ease the transition. If you believe death is darkness and nothingness, you might experience temporary confusion or a void-like state until you realize you're still conscious and can choose differently. Seth emphasized, there is no single correct death experience. Two souls dying in the same accident can have radically different crossings because they're navigating their own belief-generated landscapes. Some souls experience what Seth called replays, moments from life that flash before awareness, not as judgment but as unfinished emotional business. You might revisit a conversation you regret, or a moment of love you didn't fully receive. These aren't punishments, they're opportunities for completion. The recognition. Eventually, you realize the body is no longer necessary. This realization shifts you fully into non-physical dimensions. Seth described this as a moment of profound relief for most souls, a recognition that you are more without the body, not less. You remember your entity, your larger multidimensional self. You remember other lives, probable selves, the vast creative project you've been engaged in across multiple incarnations. It's like waking from a dream and remembering who you actually are. For some souls, this recognition is immediate. For others, especially those heavily identified with physical form or traumatized by sudden death, it takes longer. Seth insisted that rescuers, non-physical guides, including often your own entity, assist in this process, gently helping you understand what's happened. But here's the critical point. You alone must accept that you've died. No one can force this recognition. Some souls linger near physical reality for periods, confused or attached, until they're ready to acknowledge the transition. The choice point. After a period of adjustment and life review, Seth insisted that every soul faces a decision: rest in non-physical realms, reincarnate immediately, explore other dimensional realities, pursue entirely different experiences beyond the human game. Picture an actor removing costume and makeup after a performance. You've just finished a play called Your Name, Earth, 1950-2025. Now you're backstage. Do you want another role in the same theater, a different play? Do you want to sit in the audience for a while? Or do you want to leave the theater entirely and explore something beyond drama? Seth promised. No external judge exists. The concept of divine judgment, he said, is projection of human authority fears. Instead, you encounter your own beliefs about death made manifest. If you've cultivated beliefs that death is loving transition, reunion, expansion, you'll experience that. If you believe it's punishment, isolation, judgment, you'll experience that, at least initially, until you realize you're the author of the experience, not its victim. This is why Seth's teachings are so practical. Your beliefs about death now are creating your death experience then, not as magical thinking, but as structural reality. Consciousness creates its experience in all dimensions, physical and non-physical. The death crossing is alone because only you know what your life meant. Your entity knows. Your larger self knows. But the you that just died must interpret the data, and that interpretation, not the events themselves, determines what you carry forward. Here's the application for the living. If death terrifies you, examine what you believe about it. Write down your fears, then rewrite them as intentions. I believe death is painful becomes I intend to experience death as peaceful release. Seth taught that these reframes aren't denial, they're conscious creation of your crossing. The promise: if you approach death consciously, it becomes what Seth called it, a birth into larger reality. Birth is a bridge too, and Seth claimed it's often more traumatic than death. Here's why. You're compressing vast, multidimensional awareness into the narrow bandwidth of a physical nervous system. Imagine being an ocean, then squeezing into a single water droplet. That's incarnation. Before you were born, you existed as non-physical consciousness. In Framework 2, you were aware of your entity, your larger multidimensional self. You were aware of your purposes for incarnating, lessons you wanted to learn, experiences you wanted to have, gifts you wanted to contribute, and you were aware that physical life would involve amnesia. You would forget your true nature to fully experience the illusion. Picture an astronaut squeezing into a pressure suit. It's necessary for the environment. You can't walk on the moon without it, but it's restricting compared to floating free in space. That's what birth feels like from the soul's perspective. The compression. Consciousness funnels into a fetus's developing brain. You begin learning to operate a body, to accept linear time, to perceive yourself as separate from your surroundings. Seth described this as a gradual process that accelerates toward birth and continues through early childhood. For the first few years of life, most children still have one foot in Framework 2. They see imaginary friends, who are often actual non-physical entities. They remember dreams that are actually glimpses of past lives or other dimensions. But as the brain develops and socialization intensifies, the amnesia becomes complete. The forgetting. This amnesia is not a flaw, it's essential. Without it, you couldn't experience physical reality as real. If you incarnated with full memory of being eternal consciousness, you couldn't take this lifetime seriously enough to grow from it. The game only works if you forget you're playing. Seth compared it to an actor immersing so deeply in a role that they temporarily forget they're acting. The danger is forgetting forever. The gift is the authenticity of the experience while it lasts. The shock of separation. Suddenly, you experience yourself as a discrete individual rather than part of the all that is. This is the original wound every mystic tries to heal, the sense that you're isolated, vulnerable, separate from the source. But Seth insisted, this separation is illusion, but useful illusion. It allows you to experience yourself as a creative individual, making choices, learning through consequence, discovering who you are through contrast with others. Here's the revelation that changes everything. You chose this crossing. You selected your parents. You selected your era. You selected your body's limitations and gifts, its intelligence, its vulnerabilities, its genetic predispositions, not as punishment but as curriculum. Seth taught that before birth, you review probable life paths. You consult with other souls who will play major roles, your future parents, partners, teachers, even enemies. Then you dove into the amnesia required for physical experience. Knowing you'd forget, you volunteered. The birth crossing is alone because sovereignty begins before the body does. Your entity might have guided you, other souls might have consulted with you, but ultimately, you chose the dive. No one thrust you into existence. You jumped. This reframes every complaint, every "why did I choose this life?" Because you did choose it. Not masochistically, but with larger purposes your waking self doesn't remember. The practical application. When life feels unbearable, ask not, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What did I come here to learn from this?" The shift from victimhood to authorship is the beginning of conscious living. And here's the other side of that teaching. If you chose to enter this life, you can choose how you experience it. You're not trapped by circumstances. You're always on the bridge, always transitioning, always empowered to choose your next reality. The birth crossing is the forgotten crossing, but it's the one that proves Seth's larger point. You are not a helpless creature at the mercy of existence. You are a sovereign consciousness, crossing bridges of your own design, even when you've forgotten you're the architect. Every night you die, not metaphorically, structurally. Every time you fall asleep, you cross a smaller version of the death bridge, releasing identification with the physical body, entering non-physical dimensions, and navigating realms your waking ego doesn't control. Seth revealed an uncomfortable symmetry. Sleep is a nightly rehearsal for death. This is why some people are terrified of sleep, why insomniacs unconsciously resist. Falling asleep requires surrender, a temporary death of ego control, where you admit you cannot maintain waking reality through willpower alone. Picture a nightly ferry that takes you to an island you can't fully remember. You've taken this ferry thousands of times. You somehow know the way. You trust you'll return by morning. But every departure requires the same act of faith, releasing your grip on the shore. The dissolution. As you fall asleep, your sense of being a fixed identity blurs. Thought becomes non-linear. Memories and imaginings blend without distinction. Body awareness fades. You forget you have arms, legs, a face. Consensus reality loses its grip. The rule that you're a person in a bed, in a city on Earth, starts to feel optional. This is the between state, the threshold between waking and dreaming. The crossing. You move through that liminal zone Seth described, where anything is possible, often experienced as hypnagogic hallucinations, voices calling your name, visions of faces, geometric patterns, or the sensation of falling that jolts you back awake. That falling sensation? Seth said it's your consciousness remembering it's about to leave the body. Some part of you panics, pulls you back to the shore. But most nights you trust the crossing enough to let go. The dream realities. Once across, you enter dimensions we've discussed before. Framework 3, probable realities, soul meetings. You might visit with deceased loved ones. You might rehearse probable futures. You might collaborate with your entity on creative projects that filter into waking life as inspiration. But the crossing itself is the vulnerable point. Seth taught that insomnia is often fear of crossing alone, the subconscious panic that you won't return, that surrender equals death, that relinquishing conscious control means annihilation, so the ego refuses to release, keeps you trapped in the liminal zone, neither fully awake nor able to cross into sleep. Here's the truth. You've crossed this bridge thousands of times and always returned. Each sleep is practice for the final crossing, a nightly reminder that consciousness survives the dissolution of waking identity. Think about it. You literally lose consciousness every night. Your waking self dies, its thoughts stop, its control vanishes, its certainty about what's real evaporates. And yet, you wake, you return. The you that crosses into sleep is not annihilated. It's expanded into dimensions the waking you doesn't remember. The bridge between waking and sleeping is alone because no one can go to sleep for you. It's an act of individual surrender that cannot be delegated. Your partner can hold you. Your environment can be peaceful. But the moment of release, the instant you let go of waking consciousness, happens in a solitude so complete that you can't even witness it yourself. Seth suggested, master this crossing, and death loses its sting. Here's the practice. Tonight, as you're falling asleep, pay attention to the transition. Notice the moment your thoughts stop making linear sense. Notice when you forget you have a body. Notice the threshold where you dissolves into something larger. Don't try to control it. Just observe. This is the crossing, the bridge you take nightly, the rehearsal that proves you are not your waking identity, not your body, not your story. You are the consciousness that crosses over and over, always returning, always sovereign, always held by something vaster than the you that falls asleep. And one night, you'll cross and not return to this particular body. But by then, you'll have practiced the release so many times that it won't feel like an ending. It'll feel like the same crossing you've always made, except this time, you wake up in a different house. Some bridges appear without warning. You're walking through your life, confident in who you are, and suddenly the ground gives way. The identity you've operated from for years, maybe decades, fractures, and you find yourself suspended between who you were and who you're becoming, with no idea how to proceed. Seth identified these moments as mini-death experiences, not pathologies to fix, but initiations to cross. The collapse, the narratives you've relied on shatter. I am a doctor. I am someone's partner. I believe in X. Suddenly, these statements feel hollow, costumes that no longer fit. You might lose your job and realize your entire sense of worth was tied to your role. You might leave a relationship and discover you don't know who you are without them. You might question a belief system and find that your entire worldview collapses with it. This is terrifying because identity is the raft you've been clinging to in the ocean of existence. And now, the raft is disintegrating. The between. You enter what Seth called creative disintegration. It feels like falling apart. Friends might say you're having a breakdown. You might say that too. But from Seth's perspective, this is the ego's rigid structure loosening so a more authentic self can emerge. The between in these moments is brutal. You can't go back to who you were. That person is dead. But you can't yet see who you're becoming. So you exist in a void, unmoored, uncertain, stripped of the stories that gave your life shape. Most people panic here. They grab the first new identity that offers stability. Divorce leads immediately to a new relationship. Job loss leads to frantic applications for anything, just to have a title again. Spiritual crisis leads to adopting a new belief system wholesale, just to stop the vertigo. But Seth offered different guidance. Stay in the between. The crossing. You must navigate this alone because no one else can tell you who you are. Therapists can support. Friends can witness. Spiritual teachers can offer maps. But the reconstruction of self happens in a dimension only you inhabit. Picture a snake shedding skin. It's a vulnerable, isolated process. The old covering no longer fits, but the new skin is still tender. The snake can't ask another snake to shed for it. It must endure the discomfort, the exposure, the uncertainty of whether it will survive the molting. That's you during identity crisis, Seth insisted. These crossings are necessary. The soul outgrows its containers. You're not who you were at 20 when you're 40. You're not who you were before loss, before awakening, before the experience that shattered your certainties. The old identity served its purpose. Now it's too small. The bridge appears alone because becoming yourself is not a group activity. Here's the promise Seth offered. Those who cross consciously emerge as artists of their own becoming. They stop waiting for external authorities to define them. They stop clinging to outdated stories. They learn to sit in the discomfort of not knowing, trusting that clarity will emerge from the void. Those who resist crossing stay trapped in identities that no longer serve, wondering why life feels increasingly suffocating. I'll give you an example from my own experience. Years ago, I left a career I'd invested a decade building. Everyone knew me as that profession. When I walked away, I felt like I'd erased myself. Who was I, if not that role? The between lasted months. I couldn't articulate what I wanted next. I couldn't even describe myself in a sentence. Friends offered advice. Just find something similar. Don't overthink it. You need structure. But none of it felt true. I was on the bridge, and their voices were coming from the shore I'd left. They couldn't see the crossing from where they stood. Eventually, I stopped trying to force a new identity. I stopped searching for the right answer. I just stayed in the question, who am I now? And slowly, like a photograph developing, an answer emerged. Not from effort, but from allowing. That's the crossing. That's the bridge. Here's the practice. If you're in an identity crisis right now, stop trying to rebuild immediately. Sit with the disintegration. Journal this question every morning. Who am I without my stories? Let yourself not know. Let yourself be formless for a while. The between is where transformation happens. If you rush through it, you miss the initiation. But if you stay conscious in it, you emerge as someone who knows, not from belief, but from experience. That identity is fluid, creative, and ultimately your choice. Seth promised, you are not your roles, your relationships, your beliefs, or your history. You are the consciousness that creates and discards these things as needed. The bridge reveals this, and once you see it, you're never again trapped by who you used to be. Seth didn't romanticize the solitary crossing. He offered methods for navigating it consciously, rather than in terror or denial. This chapter is pure technique. Tools you can use tonight, tomorrow, or decades from now when you reach the next threshold. Recognize the bridge. The first tool is awareness. When you feel unmoored, identityless, caught between worlds, name it. Say out loud or write in your journal, I am on the bridge. This simple recognition shifts you from victim to conscious crosser. You stop flailing in panic, asking, what's wrong with me? And start observing, this is a transition. I am crossing from one state to another. This is supposed to feel disorienting. Naming the bridge doesn't remove the vertigo, but it contextualizes it. You're not broken, you're mid-crossing. Breathe into the void. Most souls panic during the between and try to rush to the next shore. They want answers immediately. Clarity now, a new identity, belief system, or structure to replace what collapsed. Seth advised the opposite. Stay in the liminal space longer than feels comfortable, because that's where transformation happens. If you rush through the between, you miss the revelation. You grab the first story that offers stability, rather than waiting for the truest story to emerge. The void is not empty, it's pregnant, with possibilities, insights, versions of yourself you haven't met yet, but you have to resist the urge to fill it prematurely. Practical application. When you're in the between, set a timer for 10 minutes. Sit in stillness. Don't meditate, don't distract, don't fix. Just be in the discomfort of not knowing. Let yourself feel the groundlessness without running from it. Seth promised, "The void speaks, but only to those who stop shouting long enough to listen." Dialogue with the between. Seth encouraged direct conversation with the crossing itself. This sounds strange, but it's profoundly effective. When you're on the bridge, ask it, "What do you want me to see? What do you want me to understand? What do you want me to release?" Then listen. Not with your rational mind, but with your intuitive awareness. The answer might come as a feeling, an image, a sudden knowing, or a sentence that appears in your mind fully formed. The between is intelligent. It's not random chaos. It's a structure built into consciousness itself, designed to facilitate growth. Treating it as an ally rather than an enemy changes the entire experience. Trust the architecture. Here's what Seth insisted: you are not the first soul to cross this bridge. Countless consciousnesses have navigated these transitions before you. The bridge exists because it's part of the design, not a mistake or punishment. Trusting the architecture means accepting that you don't need to see the entire path. You don't need to know where you're going or how long the crossing will take. You just need to take the next step. Think of it like walking in fog. You can't see 20 feet ahead, but you can see the ground directly in front of you. That's enough. The path reveals itself as you walk. Seth taught, the bridge supports your weight because it's made of the same consciousness you are. You're not walking on something external. You're walking on an extension of yourself. Release the rescue fantasy. This is the deepest tool and the hardest. Accept that no one is coming to save you. Not angels, not guides, not loved ones, not even your entity, though it's always present.